Okay, we're going to get, we're about halfway through. Now we're going to focus in on the program side of the new system. But prior to getting into the individual processes like entry and exit, we want to briefly discuss the program area of the system. Most of our existing users should be fairly familiar with it. We haven't really changed the basic layout of it. Since we covered most of the client profile stuff, and a lot of that stuff's been changed, a lot of new features in this new section too. Under the Program and Services tab, that's where all your program records and services and entry and exit dates and also bed inventory information is all kept. Within this area, if the client currently has any program records, enrollment stays, whether they're currently enrolled or been exited out, they'll be listed here in each individual record. Clicking on each record will basically provide information on that specific stay. Then we also have created the new program enrollment utility here that basically allows for the enrollment of the client into a new program stay. And we're going to kind of go into that. All program events, such as program enrollments and exits, are all now process-based, kind of keeping with the same theme of everything being process-based. And when started, the system will walk you through the necessary steps and screens to collect the required data and complete the process. For our existing users, there used to be like a program enrollment, and you'd have to click over to this page to enter in one data element, and then you'd actually have to know things about the system to find the data element to enter it in. That no longer is, that's the thing of the past now, because everything's basically going to walk you through almost in a wizard-like selection that you just need to know the data that you have, and it'll basically walk you through the screens. The program enrollment consists of about 4 or 5 different parts. There is the initial program selection. Then there is a household selection area, because program enrollments, as the third bullet point says, now allow for entire households to be entered into a program at the same time. But we have a pretty intuitive process that also allows each client to have separate data collected all within the same kind of loop process. There's the data element validation, and then there's the assessment loop, and the final enrollment screen steps. So we'll kind of go through each one of those each time. And with the household, it doesn't matter if you're doing 1 person, 2 people, 10 people, the system will support and dynamically build screens depending on how many people are included in this specific enrollment. Now, the first thing that you need to do is go to the new enrollment utility, and basically it has the familiar, you pick the program and the site that the client is going to be enrolled into, and the programs basically are based on the agency the client's in, as well as the permissions that the user has, you know, which programs that user has permission to administer that program from. Once you've selected the program, the site list will be dynamically built. Now the site, you know, has changed in the system for some time. It's now basically a physical site location, and that's where the program is being physically administered from. So once you select those, you basically click the Enroll button, and the next step it'll take you to is what we call a household selection screen. Throughout the processes and everything, we kind of call these the household selection grids, and the system will basically show you all the current households this particular client has for inclusion or exclusion in this particular program. Now, to include the client, all you basically have to do is check the box. You can check 1, all, none, depending on whatever you need. Click the enrollment button again. Then you're off and running with that many people in the process. Now, as we've said before, every client must have an active global data sharing policy prior to being enrolled in a new program. Any client that does not have a data sharing policy will not be permitted to be included in the process, because the data sharing policy is so important, and it has such a specific entry process. Any client, whether it's the original client you selected, in an individual process, or any household members you've selected, don't have a sharing policy, the system's just going to stop it right then and there, and you're going to get a little message that says, warning, system has identified the following clients. They don't have a data sharing policy. It'll actually list the name of the clients for you. and you can do one of two things there. You can restart the process and not include those specific clients, or you'll need to go back and set up a specific data sharing policy as we've explained earlier, and then reset the process and include all the members that you want in this enrollment. The next check that it goes through, once it goes through the data sharing check, is performs a second check to ensure every client included has completed all the required, what we call universal profile-based data sharing elements on their client profile. While the client profile only requires an agency and a name to be initially collected during the enrollment or during the creation process, to enroll a client in the program, the system and HUD for programs, since most of the programs are homeless-based, requires these data elements: date of birth, Social Security number, ethnicity, race, gender, and veteran status to be completed prior to the enrollment. Now, any of those clients that are missing one or more of these data elements will be required to collect them during this enrollment step. As we mentioned earlier, you're allowed to do any kind of partial data collection, but once you do an enrollment, the system will require specific ones to be entered. Now, rather than like with the data sharing process, instead of stopping the process, showing the clients, making you go back to the profile, visit each one for each client, manually fill in the data elements, save it, then restart the process, we decided to kind of intuitively include this within the enrollment process. So once it's collected, you can pretty much collect them and keep on going in the process. Now, what the system does is when you come here, we kind of have a client looping process, and we'll kind of explain that a little bit more when we get into the assessment part of it. But every single client included in this process will have their own grid basically here. It could be just one client if it's a single-person enrollment, or 8 clients if that's how many people are included in the household. And what it will show is it's kind of a dynamically built screen here for each client of all the elements that we've mentioned before that are required that may be missing. Now, as you see here, here's the basic 6. This is, I guess, a worst-case scenario, that the client basically doesn't have any of the required data elements, and they all will be required to be entered at this time before they are completed. Now, once you're done, you basically can hit Save and Next, and the system will basically loop to each client that's in the enrollment to make sure all of them are completed. Now, once you've gone through the first enrollment, once these elements are completed and saved, the system will actually write them back to the client profile, so that once they're kind of collected, any subsequent enrollment you do, they're there. You probably won't have to collect things like date of birth, Social Security number, and stuff like that again after the initial enrollment. However, during this process, there is a specific data element that is required to be revisited and at least confirmed for every program enrollment. And the system will prompt for this response for each client to kind of take another look at this data element, even if it has been specifically answered, and that's veteran status. Basically, HUD requires this one to be relooked at every entry. Even if it is a subsequent enrollment and all the other data elements are completed, what the system will do is if it has been completed, each client will it'll kind of pull in their current profile data element, whether it's no or yes, for the user to basically confirm it. If the information hasn't changed, basically you just hit Save on it, Save and Next, go to the next client, and kind of go through that confirmation stage. Now, you also, at this point in time, have the ability to change it. Maybe, I don't know, someone wasn't a veteran, or at least they reported they weren't a veteran during their initial stay, but during their second stay, they become more comfortable, whatever, they should now let out that they are a veteran. You can easily just change this to yes, and continue on your way with the enrollment, and any new information collected will be written out to the profile. Now, as with the veteran status on the client profile, same thing here in the data element section. When you hit yes to it, the system will also open up with a military history grid that allows for collection of military history, whether you need to initially enter it, whether it needs to be changed, updated, a new service area is added, as we previously discussed. Once those 2 checks are done with and our confirmation screens are done with, the system will launch into what is known as what we call an assessment loop. in which all required as well as optional program-specific data elements are displayed to allow the proper data collection prior to enrollment occurring. Now, all the 6 main sections within a profile are within the client assessment area will be, again, prompted for, and that includes health, education, employment, income, benefits, as well as domestic violence. Now, during this assessment loop, users have the opportunity to collect data on a per-client basis for each above assessment screens. Now, what the system will also do is associate any data collection, any data collected per assessment to this program that you're enrolling into, as well as the entry, basically the program entry assessment type. So instead of for our existing users that used to have to enter these information, especially the income and benefits, and pick, oh, it's at entry or this is at exit, the system knows the process you're doing and will automatically do that work for you. Now, while each program enrollment will contain all 6 of these by default, depending on the program type, basically we have the, from the HUD data standards, we know which program types require which assessments to be included during entry and exit. The system will categorize those and either require or place them as optional. Those that are required will be highlighted in red and have the little asterisk. Basically, that means that assessment needs to be completed for all clients included in the enrollment before you can continue to the next assessment or finish the process and, continue on to the next step. Any ones that are optional, usually, the health and the education and employment ones are optional for all programs. It's your choice, depending on your individual agency rules or what you want to collect for program types, COC rules that are enacted. That information can be collected as you wish. You can collect it for just the adults, one of the clients, none of the clients. It's basically up to you to what you want to do. Now, when you hit a required element, the next elements will not be shown. It's basically a, hey, you got to finish this before we show you what's next. However, if you go to the next element, like education, it'll basically is smart enough to open up until you hit the next required element, because it basically allows you a nice, easy navigation in between each one. Now, as we kind of talked during the data elements section, where it kind of shows all the clients, it kind of provides a looping process to basically collect a data element as well as assessment information on a per client basis. We think we did this on a fairly logical, straightforward manner. Hopefully it'll only take a couple enrollments to kind of get the hang of it. And as I said before, each client will be listed with their name as well as the status of whether the data has been completed or not. All of them, when initially entering an assessment loop or even the data element validation, all have the status of incomplete. That means, hey, no data has been saved or collected for this specific client. And as the information is completed and you cycle through clients, the status will be updated. Now, this is an example of the 3 PHMIS clients, and we're hitting the health assessment, and since it is required, you can see here there's tabs that open up, allows you to focus singularly on this one required assessment. It opens up all the individual information, kind of just as we explained in the assessment loop. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the collection here, because those, whether you're doing it during a program or a general, it's all the same rules. You fill in the data elements. You basically enter in the assessment date. And then you can either hit Save or Save and Next. We definitely recommend hitting the Save and Next feature, because what it'll do is not only will it complete the process, save the data to the client, it'll cycle the person to the next one in the grid. And also, once you get to the end of the grid and everyone's completed, if you hit Save and Next, the system is smart enough to know that all the clients are completed. It'll actually automatically take you to the next assessment tab. So it's very smart of just entering the data you need, save and next, entering the data you need, and you kind of just go through this entire process until you're finished with the enrollment loop. Now, as I kind of said before, once they're all completed, you have the ability to move forward. Now, because of some of those scenarios that could have a large amount of clients and everything there, it could be easy to kind of lose your place. Hey, what client am I on? What data should I put in? So up here on this blue information bar, you always want to check it, because it always shows the specific client you're on right now, whatever screen's there, that's the information you're collecting for the client, what assessment it is, as well as what process you're performing, an entry or an exit, a health assessment. So if you kind of lose your place and you're like, oh, which person, what data am I entering? Just take a little glance up here, and it should put you back on track wherever you are. As we kind of said before, required assessments basically stops you. Don't see the next tab. Once you do complete that, if you hit save and next, it'll automatically move along. But if you do just hit save, the system will basically, just like in the assessments place within the client profile, allows these forward and backward navigation buttons to be activated. They'll only be activated when certain, requirements are required. However, if you get to the employment ones, education ones, these will automatically be enabled because, it's optional. You can do what you want for this specific program type. And you basically kind of just go through this entire process until you come to, at least with program enrollments, the domestic violence assessment. Use the same process in navigating it to it. Now, the enrollment process will be a little bit different than the exit one because the enrollment does require both the data element validation, which also looks at the confirmation of the veteran status, as well as the domestic violence status. Same kind of rules. Basically, HUD requires that these data elements, even if they're initially filled out, need to be reconfirmed or can be changed at that time. So you come in here and use pretty much the same process that you've used before. It'll suck in since the domestic violence status will already be set because it needs to be set prior to a global data sheet, which is sharing sheet, which is required before enrollment. It'll pull in the client's current domestic violence status. And basically you answer the same information, yes, no, enter the assessment date, and move along. Now, if the same information is there, you pretty much hit save and confirm it. But if it has changed, if a person is not was not a domestic violence victim, but now during this enrollment their information has changed and they are now, you can make that change. The same thing, you can toggle it back from yes and no, and the system will write that back to their current assessment within their client profile, and it'll basically go through the same exact rules. Once the assessment loop is finished out, before we get into the finish of the assessment loop, the system actually has what we talked about, the ability to actually import these assessments withinto assessment loops. We kind of talked about the assessment date before, and all assessments entered need to have a manually entered assessment date, which indicates when the data was collected. This is also included in these assessment loops for enrollments and exits. You still will be required to enter in a new assessment date. Now, any assessment that was collected in a timely fashion, whether it was from a previous program enrollment or a general assessment, the system will allow that information to be imported if it was collected within 30 days of the current date. Now, we always want everything to try to move toward a real-time data collection. So any data that has been collected and received from a client in 30 days we feel is still valid and available to be reused. For each client, there'll basically be an import feature up at the top of the assessment. Basically, all you have to do is click on that import feature, and the system will pull in their latest assessment data, that's 30 days or less from the current date, and allows the user to reuse it. Now, when it pulls in, you can, we ask that you kind of re-look over it, make sure it's the right information. You can alter it if you'd like, but then again, you still have to enter in a new assessment date, and then when you save the information, it will get written back out as a new assessment associated specifically to this program enrollment.
I'm just going to butt in here for a minute. This is Dan. Based on some feedback from our testing group, we have a testing group that tests our software before we release it. I wanted to make a point about those assessments specifically, general versus program. It's designed to be as flexible as possible, and we understand that sometimes data collection is not always as timely as it could be, and that the 30-day restriction might impose a bit of a burden. you know, for importing data, but the way we're looking at it is really there would be two different ways of collecting data. Some users like to collect data or need to collect data over a period of time. You know, the assessments may not all be done the same day. Maybe it takes a week to get all the assessments in. In that case, you need the ability to collect those assessments well before enrolling them in the program. And for those people, we didn't want to penalize anyone for having to do it that way, so we created this import feature. However, if you are putting a client into the system and you know that you're going to immediately roll them in the program, don't bother with the general assessments. Just use the program processes, and that program process will automatically write assessments back out to the assessment tab. So it's kind of up to your style, whichever way you want to do it, but choose one or the other so you don't get frustrated.
Okay, now we're going to go on to, once the assessment loop is done, what we call, you know, the final enrollment screen, which includes program entry data elements. That includes the 5 required data elements, you know, the entry date, housing status at entry, residence prior to entry, length of stay at previous residence, as well as the zip code of the last permanent residence. Now, prior to the enrollment, each client will need these entry data elements collected, which will then be associated to their individual program record. However, the system does allow the same information to be collected and saved for multiple clients simultaneously. However, this kind of a very new process here for the enrollment. The system is also very flexible during this enrollment stage, and it can allow for included clients to be enrolled together with the same information, or each client can be enrolled one at a time with different information. It's up to the user and the situation of how they want to collect this information. And we're going to show you kind of what we mean after we kind of go over these entry data elements. As we see here is basically a screenshot of the enrollment screen that you're going to come to. It's basically got the program and site hard-coded from when you selected the enrollment, the entry date, which basically is the first day of is determined to use the start of the client's period of program enrollment within the program when they start the program. Housing status and entry basically needs to be determined by the case manager or intake worker when entering a client into the program. It has basically 3 valid housing statuses that need to be entered. We'll talk a little bit more about them in the next slide. Then prior residence and length of stay are basically information on each client, you know, where they were on the night before the enrollment, select from the predefined list, as well as the zip code of last permanent residence if the client knows that information. And as we said, all this information needs to collect on a per client basis. As for the housing status, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but just a little bit of added information. Like I said before, needs to be determined by each case manager before enrolling each client. Needs to be selected from one of the following 3 valid selections: literally homeless, eminently losing their housing, and unstably housed and at risk of losing their housing. And basically the determination needs to be made based on their current housing situation. You know, are they homeless? Are they about to lose their home? Are they, you know, on the cusp, you know, 30, 60 days from losing their home? It's basically your judgment call of what you need to put in there. Now, for assistance and homeless assistance and homelessness prevention type programs, the system still uses this housing status and entry per client to determine what assistance type the client will be receiving. Now that HPRP is retired, most of the programs aren't going to use this, but there are still a couple programs that will use it. And homeless assistance type are people that are literally homeless, and homeless prevention are the ones that are either eminently losing their housing or unstably housed and at risk of losing their housing. Now, currently within the system, these relate to the new Emergency Solutions Grant Program type, which was developed for the 2011 second allotment rollout, and it only is currently for the assistance and prevention type services. That program breaks it up like that. As well as we have a couple agencies that are working on the supportive services for veteran families, basically the SSVF program, also uses this housing status to determine what assistance types each client will receive in the program. Now, with the actual enrollment screen, along with having those data elements, up at the top, basically it'll show every client that's been enrolled into the program. It's basically, again, our household selection list. That by default no clients are selected. Now the system allows users to choose which clients are going to be enrolled into the program at the same time using the same exact information. This is where you basically have the determination of, hey, you know, what information set do I want to write to which clients during their enrollment? You can select all of it at once. And enter, you know, you can select all 3 of them, and whatever data elements you enter is exit date, housing status, they're all going to share those same data elements and write out to the program record. However, you can select, you know, one at a time or whatever combinations depending on how many different sets of data needs to be collected within each program record. And basically, once you've filled out the data, we'll kind of show you here, using this example, once you fill out the data, the system will write the record, and any existing clients that remain that weren't checked, the system loops around again to collect a brand new set of entry data. As you see here, you know, for this specific situation, all 3 clients don't share the same data set. So during the first enrollment loop, what we kind of call it, is these first 2 people were checked. You know, these entry dates and housing status and residence were entered. Then you basically hit the Save button. The system will automatically enroll those 2 clients, create program records for them, and attach that data to it. Now, because the system says, hey, there's one guy that hasn't been checked, it basically will loop around. You know, the 2 clients that are already done with will be taken care of, and that last person will be left in the grid, and it'll basically reset this screen for you to recollect a whole new set of data. You check this person, as you see here, you had a different entry date, a different residence prior to entry, so you need to do a separate loop with this person, and when you hit Save, bam, that client will get a program record with that new data. Now, after you hit Save, the system will notice, hey, wait a minute, there's no more clients here that I need to deal with. It'll basically kick itself out of the process, and you're basically done with the enrollment. So that's kind of how the final enrollment screen works. Hopefully everybody will like this flexibility. Now, probably most time all the clients are going to have the same data element, but in those cases where they're different, instead of having to go through entire enrollment loops, you know, multiple times, this little feature at the end should be very helpful and reduce a bunch of time with data collection. Now, once a user has completed the program enrollment phase, answered all that information, as we showed at the beginning, the system will create an individual record. Now, each program record is still on a per-client basis, and it'll basically be shown here. As you can see here, this client is in a transitional housing and an SSO program at the same time. Now, by simply clicking on which program you want to visit, the system will basically open up the screen, and it will show all the previously entered entry data, exit data if applicable, plus what we're going to cover in the next couple slides, services that can be associated with the client, as well as some bed inventory that will be covered in the supplemental training. Now, while a client can have multiple programs, and that process is probably going to be used a lot more since there's a single client profile per agency, the same program shouldn't have any overlapping dates. The system basically has validation in there to prevent that. So if you see any validation errors saying, hey, the client's already in that program, take a look at the dates to make sure that you're not overlapping anything there. Kind of what we talked about during the enrollment stage, the system is controlled during the enrollments by individual users' permissions based on their user profile. Referred to what we call as a program and a site combination. User can't have a permission to just a program or just a site. They need to be, it's a combination together. If you do notice that you don't have a program, that you think you should have, please talk to your agency management team. They are the ones that can actually configure and add stuff to your profile. The help desk can lead you in the right direction, but unless we have prior authorization, we can't automatically give you permission to one of the agency's programs. Now, the same rules apply for existing programs. When you go and visit a client that has programs, for those programs that you have permission to enroll them in and also configure data in, there'll be the regular gray record. You can click on it, enter the program, be good to go. Now, however, for those programs that you don't have permission to, that are administered by other users in the agency, they will be kind of powdered in this light blue. when you click on the record, it won't actually let you into the program record, but what it'll do is it'll actually take you to a client data sheet, which our existing users should be familiar with, that provides you with a whole bunch of client information about the services and assessments collected for that program record, but it's basically in a read-only format, and this is the same permissions that are used in the new assessments area based on the site and user permissions. Okay, now we're going to talk about the services that you can associate to each client during their program enrollment. Most of this stuff is for existing users hasn't changed. It's pretty much the same. The one big difference is we used to have a lot of HPRP versus others kind of services here. That's kind of gone. HPRP has been retired. However, there are still remnants of the two different service types, and they're going to be explained here. There's basically the financial assistance and stabilization services that currently are under the Emergency Solutions Grant and the SSVF programs. Then there's the services provided, which are for all the other COC, Shelter Plus Care. It's basically the residential and supportive service only type programs within the system. And we're going to go over both the entry interfaces and the features associated with each. Now, as HUD goes forward, we've kind of seen that each program could possibly be moving toward having specialized services, and that's kind of even started with these financial assistance and stabilization service groups. While they both have the kind of same look and feel, the ESG and SSV do have different sets of services, and they're the ones that you see on here. Any Emergency Solution Grant, the 2011, well, these financial and these housing relocation and stabilization services that can be provided. Now, these type of services fall into one of two categories. They can either be one-time services, which cover a single day and include things as arrears payments, one-time payments, or single-day services where you only meet with them for a single day, and the system will only prompt the user for basically the day of service. If it's an assistance, probably the payment amount. Ongoing services cover a period of time, could be a week, could be a month, could be up to 3 months, and it usually prompts users for a date range. SSVF?
Actually, I'm going to cut in here, Brian. With ESG, I know some of you on the phone are ESG recipients, and I know that a lot of you are probably thinking, hey, where's the rest of ESG? The answer is, we don't know yet. We're still waiting on data standards, and I'm hesitant to make any kind of official decisions about what the new ESG, 2012 and on should look like as far as data collection without having that input first. But trust us, as soon as we know, you guys will know, but we are not ignoring the fact that that we're missing some of the ESG stuff. Back to you, Brian.
Thanks. With the SSVF stuff, pretty much the same format, but as you can see, they have some added financial assistance, some reduced stabilization services, pretty much the same format. Now, with these assistance and stabilization services, there are a couple entry and maintenance rules. The system will validate end dates for ongoing services. No service can exceed 3 months in duration. All service dates should fall also within the program participation stay. This is pretty much for all services. You know, you can't have an service date can't start before the entry date, can't end after the exit date. Have validation in the system to prevent that. Now, with these financial assistance and stabilization services, we do allow for the ability to be replicated automatically to all qualified household members when the following 3 conditions are met. Our HPRP participants that dealt with the HPRP program should be very familiar with this. Basically, the same 3 rules. The person's got to be in the program, same program, has to have the same housing status, and has to be in the household during the time of the service. Anytime those are met, basically the system will look and replicate that service out to everybody in that household. Makes data collection a little bit easier. It also helps to replicate any updated service, whether it's an ongoing service, if you leave them open and then you go to enter an end date, or you update any kind of like financial payment amount if there's a mistake made. The system will also replicate those changes out. Now, please note that for these services, both the service type, the subtype, as well as the start date are locked down. They're very integral to the replication process. So if those are a mistake, you will need to delete the service and re-enter it. And basically, we'll show you in the next slide here, there's basically two processes to delete the service. You can do it, remove it from a single client, or it allows you to remove it from an entire household. Basically, to remove it, any service, you basically click on it, enters into the grid area, you just simply hit the remove button. Down here, you'll see remove from entire household. Checkbox, if you know the service was replicated out and you made a mistake, you know you want to remove it from everybody, just check this box during the process. You need to check this before you hit the remove button. When it does that, then it will, depending on that option, remove it from all the household members that had it replicated out. The basic services grid, and as you can see here, there's a financial assistance grid that's basically got all the drop-downs. You basically walks you through the process, entering all the information it requires. Same thing with the stabilization services over here. It is located directly below the entry and exit date, kind of almost in the middle of the program record screen. Now, any action that's done, whether it's adding a new service, updating an old existing service, deleting a service, you will need to hit the save button at the bottom of the screen. We've converted most things to real time in the system. This is the one thing we haven't because of the replication process. So make sure you do hit save at the bottom of the service, the program page to update any changes. The services provided, this is for the residential or SSO services programs. They are located pretty much in the same place within the program history page, directly below the save buttons. Basically, it's a HUD predefined list. It's got a whole bunch of different services that you can associate to clients. Same rules. Services can't fall outside the program participation dates. As you see here, it's basically located right above here is, all the entry and exit information that's entered for the program. Service grid will be directly below that. You basically have a whole bunch of choices, or you can pick, temporary housing, case management, referrals, outreach, a whole bunch of information. Put in the start and end date. If it's a one-time, you can go ahead and close it out. If it's an ongoing service, you can leave it open. Just hit the add button, and it'll basically get added to the client. And, of course, you add, with all services, you add all the services that the client has received during that specific program stay.